All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 3, chapter 3, which is on the basics of digestion. So this week it's just kind of a review of our digestive organs and the process of digestion and absorption of nutrients. So the gastrointestinal tract is where we take care of our digestive processes, right? We bring in nutrients and we break them down into their component parts so that they are able to be absorbed into the body. It's basically one long tube from mouth to anus. And that tube is basically 30 feet in length. So the organs of our digestive system in order from mouth to anus are mouth, and then technically we move from mouth into the pharynx first, which is a mixed passage for both food and air. And then that splits off and the food goes down into the esophagus, from the esophagus to the stomach, and then from the stomach to the small intestine, from there to the large intestine. And that's basically where we've finished the process of digestion and absorption. And then after that, we still have the waste products of digestion that have to pass out of the body. Those will leave the body as feces through the rectum and then the anus. We do have some other accessory organs which help us. They help give us different substances that help or aid in the digestive process. So, for example, the pancreas gives us enzymes, and it gives us bicarbonate to neutralize the acid that's coming in from the stomach into the small intestine. And the liver and the gallbladder, those are going to give us bile to help us with digesting fat. So the digestive process is a multi-step process, and it sort of happens all the way from mouth to large intestines. And then we get rid of the waste products through, again, the anus or the rectum and the anus. As far as digestion, it's got kind of a couple of different parts to it. We've got mechanical digestion, which is a physical breaking down of the food. It's crushing or chewing, grinding the food, and moving it through the GI tract. And then we have chemical digestion, which is where we mix our foods with different chemicals like hydrochloric acid in the stomach and enzymes that help to break down the food into the component parts that are absorbable. So for example, when we eat protein, we can't absorb a full-sized protein into our bloodstream. We have to first break it down into the component amino acids. So we break down the protein into its building blocks, the amino acids, and then we can absorb amino acids. There is some work that is done by the smooth muscle in the digestive tract that helps to move the contents along the digestive system. So we have segmentation happens in kind of the stomach and in the small intestine, where basically it creates this sloshing motion. It sloshes the fluid and the stomach contents or the nutrient contents back and forth in the stomach and in the small intestine in order to mix them together with the enzymes and the digestive juices. And it ensures that a lot of those nutrients then come in contact with multiple parts of the wall of the small intestine so that we are better able to break down the nutrients and to absorb them more efficiently. And then we have pendular movement, which is a constrictive wave. It is going to squeeze the small intestine ahead of where the nutrients are to slow its moving, slow the contents moving through the small intestine to give us more time to absorb nutrients. So they're going to kind of stay in there a little bit longer by having a smaller tube to pass through. All right, and then our next sort of smooth muscle movement that we have in the digestive tract is called peristalsis. And this is where the smooth muscle contracts and relaxes in rhythmic waves, and it's what sort of helps propel the food along the digestive system. It propels it forward along the digestive system. So, after we chew up our food and we swallow it, we're going to call it a bolus at that point. And so it's sort of that wad of chewed up food that's mixed with saliva and whatever else that is going to go down your esophagus and into your stomach. So we'll call it a bolus at that point once we've swallowed it. And then again, the peristalsis, the peristaltic activity of the smooth motion or the smooth muscle rather is going to propel that through the digestive tract. The three types of mechanical digestion move this partially digested semi-liquid food mass called chyme at a rate of 1 centimeter per minute. So again, it's going to be a slow movement of this stuff basically from the stomach through the small intestine there. Like the stomach lets out just small amounts of chyme at a time. And then it'll travel again slowly through the small intestine. And it will take about 3 to 6 hours for that food to move through the small intestine, which gives us a long time to finish digesting that food stuff and absorb all of those really important nutrients. And the length of time it takes to travel through the small intestine depends on what type of food you've eaten, whether it's protein heavy or carb heavy or lipid heavy, will determine how long it's going to spend in the small intestine. All right, so this shows you peristalsis in the esophagus, where we have rhythmic waves of contraction that again are pushing that bolus from your mouth through the esophagus and down into the stomach. All right, so the main roles, what does the GI tract do? It breaks down our food into small components. It absorbs nutrients, and we have nice cells that line the inside of our digestive tract that prevent microorganisms and other harmful substances from our food from getting into our bodies. So we don't absorb everything that's in that food. We have protections against certain things like, bacteria and stuff. The cells that line our digestive tract tend not to absorb those things. Now, obviously, it's not a foolproof thing because everyone's had, gastroenteritis where they've had a little kind of bacterial infection or they've had food poisoning where they vomit and or have diarrhea, and that's as a result of consuming food that had some sort of bacterium or virus in it that did make it into our bodies and made us sick. And then the other thing that we need our digestive tract to do is maintain our gut microbiome, which are the bacteria and other microorganisms that live especially in our large intestine. Our good gut bacteria that help us, that we need to have in our large intestine. All right. This is sort of the organization of the body, right? We start with cells, and cells are the basic building block of any living thing. They are the smallest unit of life, right? We have unicellular organisms that are considered living things. They can carry out all of the tasks that living things can do. But in our bodies, we're multicellular organisms, so our cells tend to group themselves together to form what we call tissues. So in this case, these cells have grouped themselves together to form a particular type of tissue. And then we put multiple tissue types together to form organs. And then organs that work for a common purpose are linked together into an organ system. So in this case, we're looking at the stomach, which is part of our digestive system. All right, we've kind of talked about the organs of the GI tract a little bit, but mouth, what happens in each of these in the mouth? We're ingesting, so we're bringing in the nutrients, and then we're beginning both chemical and mechanical digestion of our food. So chewing is the first part of the mechanical digestion, to physically smash and crush and break down our food and mix it with saliva, forming that bolus that we will swallow into our esophagus. The pharynx and the esophagus do propulsion. They move that bolus from the mouth down to the stomach. Let's go back to the mouth for just a second here. I skipped the mechanical or the chemical digestion that happens in the mouth. So there are enzymes in our saliva that help to start breaking down starch in particular. So it starts to break down carbohydrates, which is why it's kind of gross to do. But if you eat a cracker, like a saltine cracker, which is not sweet in and of itself, it's just sort of a salty, bland substance. If you chew that for like 3 to 5 minutes without swallowing, enough of that of the starch in that cracker will be broken down into sugars, and it'll start to taste a little bit sweet. So we do have enzymes in our saliva that start the carbohydrate digestion, chemical digestion process. All right, then through the pharynx and esophagus to the stomach. And the stomach is going to continue mechanical digestion and chemical digestion. The stomach has 3 layers of smooth muscle that, again, help to kind of slosh around the food and mix it with the gastric juices, which contain enzymes and acid and mucus and a variety of other substances that help us break down other substances. In the stomach, we can begin protein digestion, and we're going to continue with like carbohydrate absorption. And when the contents of the stomach move on to the small intestine, instead of calling it a bolus, now we call it chyme, because it's mixed with it's liquid, kind of semi-liquid, and there's a lot of acidity to it. So sometimes it's called acid chyme, but that's what then moves into the small intestine. We do a tiny, tiny bit of absorption in the stomach through the stomach wall, not a ton, but a little bit of fat-soluble substances can be absorbed through the stomach. Alcohol can be absorbed directly through the stomach, things of that nature. Our next organ then is the small intestine, which is where the bulk of the chemical digestion is going to happen, and the bulk of the absorption of nutrients is going to happen. So we do have mechanical digestion happening in the small intestine. Segmentation, the chyme is kind of sloshed back and forth in there to mix the chyme with juices coming from the pancreas and from the gallbladder and the liver. And then that is then propelled through the small intestine. So there's some propulsion that happens there. As far as chemical digestion, we're basically going to finish chemical digestion of pretty much all of our nutrients. So we're going to have enzymes that will help us finish breaking down our proteins and our carbohydrates and our lipids that will come from the small intestine itself, but also from the pancreas and some products from the liver and the gallbladder. The small intestine is the main area where we absorb those nutrients as well. So we call it the small intestine, not because it's like a short organ, but because of the diameter of the tube. It's got a thinner diameter. The large intestine is much shorter than the small intestine, but it has a thicker diameter. So we call it a large intestine. After the food leaves the small intestine, goes into the large intestine. At this point, we mostly have sort of products that we cannot digest or absorb, and we have a fair amount of water left over in there. So as that stuff enters the large intestine, we're not doing any more mechanical breakdown or mechanical digestion, but we do have a little bit of remaining chemical digestion that is going to occur in the large intestine, but we don't do it. The bacteria in our gut do it. So they're going to receive things that our small intestine and our bodies don't have enzymes to break down. So the bacteria will break it down. And the nice thing that they do is that they kind of share the wealth with us as well. So they get some of those nutrients, we get some of those nutrients. They make things like vitamin K from some of those nutrients, and they share that with our bodies. Vitamin K is essential for blood clotting. So the chemical digestive processes that happen in the large intestine only happen because we have those good gut bacteria in there. As far as absorption, mostly water is going to be absorbed there, but also some salts and some vitamins. Like I said, vitamin K would be absorbed through the large intestine because it's being produced by our gut bacteria. And then propulsion, the waste products are going to exit the large intestine into the rectum, and from the rectum through the anus, and we're going to do elimination. So getting rid of those wastes, that the stuff that we didn't digest and didn't want. As far as the accessory organs are concerned, again, the liver produces bile that helps to digest fat, but then it is stored in the gallbladder before it's released into the bile duct and into the small intestine. And then the pancreas is a really important organ for digestion. It makes enzymes, a lot of enzymes that we need to digest our nutrients, but it also makes bicarbonate, and bicarbonate is going to help us neutralize that acid that's coming from the stomach. The acid that's produced in the stomach is hydrochloric acid, which is a very, very strong acid, which is great for its place in the stomach, but the enzymes and stuff in our small intestine work better at a more neutral pH. So the bicarbonate comes from the pancreas into the small intestine and neutralizes that acid. Okay, so this is sort of what we've already talked about. We will kind of roughly go through a little bit of this that we haven't yet talked about. As we swallow, as we form that bolus, our tongue kind of pushes that food mass back into the back of our throat or into the opening of our pharynx. And then that we can trigger a swallowing response to that. And then the bolus will enter the pharynx. As we swallow, we want to make sure, because like I said, the pharynx is a mixed passage for both food and air. So we want to make sure that the food gets directed down into the esophagus and into the stomach and not into your trachea and then down into your lungs. So as we swallow, the epiglottis, which is a little piece of cartilage that kind of sits around the opening to the trachea, or to the larynx rather, kind of your voice box, if you will. As we swallow, the trachea kind of pulls up. It elevates a little bit in our throat, and that causes the epiglottis to cover over the opening to the trachea, so that the food gets directed to the esophagus instead. Now, once in a while that goes a little bit awry because everybody has like choked on their water or swallowed wrong or whatever, and triggered a coughing fit, and that's because we've aspirated a little bit of something into our lungs instead of it going down our esophagus to our stomach. So there's a look at that process. Here's our mouth at the top here. We have the tongue in there, and like I said, we're chewing the food with our teeth, but our tongue helps us to mash the food, form a bolus, and push it back into the opening of our pharynx. And then here is that little epiglottis. It's actually shaped like a spoon. And it is sort of sitting over the opening to the trachea here. So when we swallow and that bolus moves through here, the epiglottis folds kind of over and the trachea pulls up a little bit to direct that food into the esophagus and down to the stomach. All right, our stomach has, it has two sphincters. It has, at the end of the esophagus where it enters the stomach, we have the gastroesophageal sphincter, or the lower esophageal sphincter. And that, as we swallow, should relax and allow the food to enter our stomach. It should then contract after the food has passed through to prevent the stomach contents from splashing back up into the esophagus. Now, people who have a weakness or a laxity in the gastroesophageal sphincter can have that little bit of backflow of hydrochloric acid or stomach contents into the esophagus, and we call that acid reflux, or if it's like more severe, we can call it gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GERD. Some people might have it just occasionally and just call it heartburn. But it is potentially dangerous. It can cause esophageal cancer if it is continuous. If we're constantly having irritation of the esophageal cells, they can mutate and become cancerous. So it can lead to esophageal cancer, and it can be more serious than just a little bit of heartburn. So it is something to take seriously. All right. Stomach, we've already talked about, but some of the digestive secretions, hydrochloric acid, as we said, is the acid. It has a pH of about 2, so it's a very strong acid. What do we need acid for? Well, it helps activate the enzyme pepsin, which helps us break down protein, so it aids in protein digestion. It also breaks down some of the connective tissue in proteins, so it helps with protein digestion in that way as well. It enhances absorption of certain minerals, and it hopefully will destroy a lot of the ingested microorganisms, bacteria and stuff that we might have ingested. Hopefully they will make it down into the stomach acid and be destroyed by that before they can make us ill. Now, how do we keep the hydrochloric acid from burning our stomach wall? Well, the stomach wall produces kind of copious amounts of mucus, and that mucus lines the entire inside of the stomach, and it prevents the acid from actually touching our tissue and damaging the stomach lining. All right, so other stuff, there are digestive enzymes. There is this substance called intrinsic factor, which is important for vitamin B12 absorption. And we'll talk about vitamin B12 in our vitamins chapter, but it is really important for making DNA. And if we're vitamin B12 deficient, we can end up having a type of anemia that's caused by B12 deficiency. So intrinsic factor is really important for lots of things, but B12 absorption is really important. Then the stomach makes different hormones as well. It makes the hormone gastrin, which is involved in kind of hunger and satiety and releasing other gastric hormones and other digestive contents and things like that. All right, so again, in here in the stomach, the bolus becomes chyme, which is semi-liquid, and it's partially digested, and it's full of digestive juices and acid and mucus and all kinds of fun stuff. And there's a look at our stomach. Here's that lower esophageal sphincter. Over here is the pyloric sphincter, the second sphincter on the stomach, and that is going to prevent or control how much of our stomach contents move into the small intestine. So how quickly we're going to release those contents will be determined by the pyloric sphincter. All right, gastrin, as I said, it's a hormone that's involved in digestion. It stimulates digestive activities, so secretion of enzymes. It increases gastric motility, so like movement or contraction of the smooth muscle in the stomach that will help mix up the stomach contents. And it leads to a little bit of an increase in emptying of the stomach. So opening up of that pyloric sphincter and letting the stomach contents move into the small intestine. So things that are going to exit the food faster, things that are fairly easy to digest. So liquids, carbohydrates, things that are low in fiber, things that are low in calorie, those will move through more quickly. High fiber, higher fat, high protein foods exit slower, which is why eating high fiber and high protein foods will keep you feeling full longer and is actually really good for you, so that you don't overeat. The pyloric sphincter basically is going to allow about 1 teaspoon of chyme to enter the small intestine every 30 seconds. And it prevents the contents from moving from the small intestine back into the stomach, which again, this digestive tract is made to go one way from mouth to anus and not the other direction. So we've got to prevent backflow at a couple of different points here. All right, moving into the small intestine. Again, it's a long tube, about 30 feet in length. So very long. It's narrow, so that's where it gets the name small. Again, it's because it is it's narrow. It's not as thick as the large intestine. And it has 3 parts to it. It has the duodenum, which is the shortest part and connected to the stomach through that pyloric sphincter. Next comes the jejunum, which is the middle segment. And then the lowest part is the ileum. That's the longest part of the small intestine, and it's the part that will attach to the large intestine. It's a long tube already, being 20 feet in length, but the interior surface has all kinds of ridges and finger-like projections and circular folds and all kinds of things in it to increase the surface area. And the reason that we want to have a nice big increased surface area here is to make it really efficient to both digest and absorb nutrients. So the more surface area we have, the better we are at absorbing those nutrients. So there's a look at the circular folds. So that's what it looks like if you put a scope down through the esophagus, through the stomach, and into the small intestine. Lots of little circular folds in the walls. And then if you look at the walls of the intestine, it's not smooth. It has all of these finger-like projections, these little finger-like folds that stick up from the wall, which increases surface area. And the inside of those villi, it's what they're called, is where we have our blood vessels and our lymph vessels for absorbing nutrients. And then the cells that line those villi are simple columnar epithelial cells, if you've taken any kind of histology course previously, but they don't have a smooth flat top. They also have little teeny tiny little finger-like projections at the surface where they are going to come into contact with all those stomach contents moving through, or the chyme that's coming through from the stomach into the small intestine. And again, that's another way to further increase surface area so that absorption takes place really, really efficiently. All right. So again, small intestine, we are going to finish that digestive process and absorb pretty much every nutrient that we're able to absorb. What makes it from the small intestine, from the ileum of the small intestine into the large intestine, which is also known as the colon, has to pass through another valve called the ileosphincter, or the ileocecal valve, or ileocecal sphincter. And again, that keeps everything moving in one direction, from the small intestine to the large intestine and not the other direction. The reason that that's important is that our large intestine has all of those bacteria in them. And if they stay in the large intestine, they're great. We want them there. But if they move into the small intestine, then we have an infection. So we have bacteria where it shouldn't be. So we want to keep all of that stuff moving in the right direction. The large intestine has three major sections. It has the cecum, which is a blind-ended pouch at the very beginning of the large intestine. It's where the ileum passes into the large intestine, is from the ileum to the cecum. So that's where we get ileocecal sphincter. Then we have the colon, which is divided into like four parts: the ascending or ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, and the sigmoid colon, which is a little S-shaped part. And then it changes a little bit and turns into the rectum. This is about 5 feet long, but it has a much wider diameter than the small intestine at about 2.5 inches. And like I said, most of what gets absorbed here is water and electrolytes, but the bacteria in our large intestine can break down some of the stuff that our small intestine wasn't able to do. And they use those nutrients for themselves, but they also share the spoils with us. So they're very helpful in that regard. All right, so once our food substance reaches the large intestine, it passes through in about 12 to 24 hours, and it depends on a number of things: our age, our health, our diet, and especially our fiber intake. So the older we get, the slower things move. If we're unhealthy or we're ill, again, things might move through too fast or too slow. The types of food we eat, but particularly the fiber intake. Now, fiber is particularly important for our digestive health, in that it helps to bulk up the feces, because we don't break it down, we don't absorb it. So it bulks up the feces and ensures that it moves through faster to prevent constipation. Bacteria in the colon produce vitamin K, and biotin, another type of vitamin. They break down some of that fiber and any kind of carbs that we can't digest. In the process, they produce a waste product called methane, which is why your toots smell kind of gross. It gives you that kind of fart smell of a fart. So they produce methane gas. carbon dioxide, hydrogen, and other compounds. Once they pass through the colon, then we move into the rectum. That stool or the feces then is stored in the rectum. And then the anus or the anal canal is the small little piece that has two sphincters. It has an internal and an external sphincter that allow us to defecate under voluntary conditions, right? So the internal anal sphincter is smooth muscle, which we don't have conscious control over, but the external anal sphincter is skeletal muscle, and it allows us to control when and where we defecate. And it's part of our, sort of potty training when we are toddlers to learn how to learn the signs that we have to go potty and to learn how to control the external anal sphincter and only let it relax when we are ready to defecate. All right, moving into our accessory organs, the liver is the largest internal organ of the body. It's quite large. It is in our abdominal cavity on the right-hand side under our diaphragm. It produces bile, which we need for fat digestion. So I know we think of bile as being something from the gallbladder, and it is, but it's produced in the liver, then stored in the gallbladder. Let's see, the liver also is a good storage area for a number of nutrients. It stores vitamin A, D, B12, E. It stores minerals, copper, iron, and it also stores our extra glucose in the form of glycogen. Um, and it helps with metabolism of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So it's a very important organ in terms of digestion and other things. And the other thing it does is it detoxifies alcohol, which is a toxin that we do take in. Ethanol or ethyl alcohol that we consume is a toxin. And our liver works really, really hard to detoxify that and get it out of our system. So that's why the liver is damaged when people have like a substance use disorder or they're alcoholics is sort of the old term for that. The gallbladder, as I said, doesn't really make anything. It takes the bile that's produced in the liver, it stores it, and it concentrates it. So it takes a little bit of the water content out of it and makes it a little bit stronger, which is why we can actually live without a gallbladder. It's still kind of a risky thing if you don't have a gallbladder to eat a high-fat meal because it can cause a little bit of diarrhea since the bile is a little bit less concentrated, but it can you can live without a gallbladder. If you don't have one, you're obviously fine. You don't need to take any supplements or anything because of that. So after we eat a meal with fat in it, that triggers some hormones to be released that cause the gallbladder to contract and push some of that bile down through the bile duct or common bile duct and into the small intestine. Pancreas, we've discussed before, it produces hormones that are essential to regulating our blood sugar, insulin, and glucagon. It produces digestive enzymes, as I said, and bicarbonate. The bicarbonate neutralizes the acid in the chyme because the acid is bad for enzyme activity in the small intestine. It's good for enzyme activity in the stomach, but bad for enzyme activity in the small intestine. So it helps to reduce the acidity and turn that chyme more neutral in terms of pH. And there is where all of those are located. All right, getting a little bit into hormones, enzymes, and bile. What do they actually do? Hormones, basically regulate digestive processes. They regulate secretion of different enzymes and other digestive juices. They regulate the activity of our cells in the digestive system. So hormones are important, and there's a lot of different hormones that do a lot of different things. Enzymes are they're biological catalysts, which means they speed up chemical reactions without becoming part of the chemical reaction themselves. So they help chemical reactions happen more easily and faster and cost us less energy. All right, looking at some particular hormones here. Gastrin, like we said, stimulates the stomach to release hydrochloric acid. And gastric lipase, any word with ASE at the end is an enzyme. Lipase digests lipids. So gastric lipase helps us break down fat. Ghrelin stimulates hunger. It's also produced in the digestive tract. I remember that one, ghrelin, because when you are hungry, your stomach growls. It says grr, so ghrelin stimulates hunger. Secretin causes the pancreas to release bicarbonate. Cholecystokinin stimulates digestive enzymes from the pancreas, and it controls the pace of digestion. So these are, various different hormones and their roles in digestion. Enzymes, again, actually take our food stuff and break it down into the component parts. Enzymes are secreted by the salivary glands. Salivary amylase is what's secreted there. The stomach, the pancreas, and the small intestine. Like I said, the enzymes from the pancreas are actually the most important. They're most responsible for a large portion of the digestion that happens. So amylases digest carbohydrates, lipases, as we said, fat. And then as far as proteins, we have trypsin, chymotrypsin, and or carboxypeptidase to digest proteins. BIOL is used for fat digestion. It's kind of a greenish substance. It takes large fat globules and it emulsifies it, meaning it breaks it down into smaller pieces that are easier to be absorbed. And then it's actually recycled. Most of it is recycled. It can be reused by recycling through the liver. So it gets released and then it gets reabsorbed, usually from the large intestine, and goes back into the liver and gets recycled into fresh bile. Okay, so here are the different secretions from different glands and what they do. You can review these on your own. You have access to these notes, so I don't need to go through them with you. All right, so now that we've talked about digestion, the last thing we have to do is the absorption of those nutrients. So after we completely break them down, we've got to get them from the digestive tract into our bodies, into our bloodstream, so that they can be used by our bodies. And that's the process of absorption. So primarily this is going to happen through the walls of the small intestines, but as we said, some things do get absorbed a little bit in the stomach and a little bit in the large intestine. The two main transports of those things are the circulatory system, which is our blood vessels, and the lymphatic system, which are lymph vessels that pick up, extra tissue fluid and eventually return it to our circulation through our veins. Nutrients are going to be sent to the liver for processing before they're delivered to body cells, and we are really efficient. Our GI tract, as long as it's functioning properly, is super efficient at absorbing nutrients. So between 92 and 97% of the nutrients from our food are digested and absorbed. So that's very, very high efficiency work there. Basically, what goes into the bloodstream is going to be water-soluble stuff, since the plasma of our blood is mostly water. So water-soluble substances will get absorbed directly into our bloodstream. And then fat-soluble nutrients are going to go into the lymphatic system and kind of be distributed that way, or be sent to the liver for processing and then sent into the bloodstream. If we eat more nutrients than we need, those surplus nutrients are going to be stored. So when we eat a meal, what we're trying to do is make ATP, which is the energy molecule that most of our cells use to carry out all of their necessary functions. So as we eat, what we do is we utilize those carbohydrates, for example, to make more ATP. So first thing we're going to do is, after we eat and we absorb the nutrients, we're going to have our cells try to make ATP to replenish our ATP stores. After that, what's left over will go into the liver and be stored as glycogen, as our extra glucose is stored as glycogen in the liver. And then if there are still nutrients left over after that, then they get turned into fat. No matter if it's carbohydrates, lipids, or proteins, they all get turned into fat if we have excess of anything. And then the excretory system passes the wastes out of the body. So, some of it will go through our skin, some through our lungs, some out through the end of the digestive tract through the rectum and anus. All right, and in here you can see these are inside of the villi in the small intestine. We have blood capillaries close to the surface there. So as the nutrients get absorbed through these cells at the surface, water-soluble ones will go into the blood vessels, the blood capillaries. And the fat-soluble nutrients move into the lymphatic capillaries, or they're called lacteals sometimes, so you may have heard that. And then we will basically take those nutrients. A lot of it will go first to the liver for being processed and then sent out to the rest of the body. All right. Other body systems and mechanisms that affect our use of nutrients. The nervous system is also obviously kind of in charge of everything in our bodies. It's the fast-acting control system. So our nervous system can stimulate our appetite as well. Hormone ghrelin signals our brain to say, oh, I'm hungry, and to go out and seek food and get food to eat. The endocrine system, we've already kind of talked about. Hormones help us regulate hunger and satiety and digestion and absorption of nutrients and how we use those nutrients and so forth. So, for example, insulin and glucagon, they work against each other to help regulate your blood sugar. Insulin is secreted when your blood sugar is high after a meal to get your cells to use up that sugar that's in the blood. And glucagon is released when your blood sugar is low, and it tells your liver to release glucose from glycogen into the bloodstream and to take other substances like proteins or lipids and turn them into new glucose, because glucose is the preferred fuel for most of our tissues to use to make ATP. So, that's sort of a good example of endocrine regulation. All right, here's that excretory system. Some of our like nitrogenous wastes and things like that will go through the bloodstream to the kidneys, where everything is sort of filtered out, put into the urine, stored in the bladder, and then excreted from the body through the urethra in the form of urine. All right, common digestive disorders. In the mouth and throat, we have gingivitis and periodontal disease. So, brush your teeth regularly to avoid those things, to avoid receding of your gums and getting your teeth being loose, or getting dental caries, which are cavities in your teeth, all of that kind of stuff. Good oral health is important for your digestive system. Swallowing problems, we have dysphagia, which is difficulty swallowing that can happen for a variety of reasons, whether it be like a tumor or a nervous system problem, or maybe a like narrowing of the esophagus can happen as well. That makes it difficult to swallow. And then esophageal problems, we talked about heartburn or acid reflux being caused by weakness in the lower esophageal sphincter. If we have that chronically, we call that gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GERD. So those are both bad things. Some of this can be helped with lifestyle and dietary modifications. So smoking and drinking alcohol, reclining after eating, eating large evening meals, all of that can make things worse. So what we recommend if people have kind of frequent heartburn would be to quit smoking, because we would recommend that anyway, because it's really, really bad for you. Alcohol is very acidic, so it leads to more acidity in the stomach. You don't want to eat right before going to bed. You don't want to lie down and watch TV right after eating. You want to let gravity do its work and keep that stuff down in your stomach rather than letting it splash up into your esophagus. You want to eat smaller, more frequent meals, and you want to limit the amount of really acidic foods like hot sauces, spicy foods, coffee, soda, things that are really acidic. to kind of help with that. And then in addition, um, physical health, physical activity always helps to train all of our muscles. So being physically active and healthy can help with that as well. And then if all else fails, you can take medications to lower the amount of acid that is being produced in the stomach. What we're seeing on the pictures below, one of those is an ulcer. It looks like a peptic ulcer. That happens when, basically the stomach acid burns a hole in the stomach lining. Typically what causes that in most cases is a bacterial infection. There's a bacterium called Helicobacter pylori. And what the bacterium does is it actually eats the mucus off of the lining of the stomach and allows the stomach acid to contact the stomach wall. So it's not typically a stress thing that causes. I know people used to think you get ulcers from stress, but usually it's a bacterial infection. And if you take an antibiotic and heal that infection, then usually your stomach will heal on its own and won't require surgery. We're looking at some gallstones next to that. So those guys are fairly large and or sort of crystals that form and block up the bile ducts and stuff, and that can become very, very painful. And it can become a serious health emergency, a surgical emergency where you need to have your gallbladder removed. All right, stomach stuff, like I said, gastroenteritis, anything with itis at the end is an inflammation of something. So gastroenteritis is a stomach flu, usually caused by a virus or a bacterial infection. Yeah, and that will, lead you to have vomiting, sometimes diarrhea as well. Like I said, usually it's a viral or bacterial infection. Peptic ulcers, like I said, usually bacteria. In most cases, more than 50% of cases have the bacterium Helicobacter pylori. But if you are drinking a ton of alcohol, that can mess up your whole stomach function as well and can lead to peptic ulcers. So alcohol use disorder can cause that as well. And then gallstones we talked about may require surgical removal. Those small, hard crystalline structures that block up or fill up your gallbladder and lead to clogging of the ductwork and all of that kind of stuff. And it's quite painful when you have what we call a gallbladder attack from the gallstones. It becomes very, very painful as well. All right. Disorders of the intestines. Now, I wouldn't necessarily consider having a little toot every now and then, a little flatulence to be a disorder, right? Just eating certain types of food can lead us to be a little gassy and have a little extra gas produced from our intestine. So not necessarily a disorder per se, but it's kind of related to the type of food that we're eating. Constipation and diarrhea, those are definite disorders of the intestines. Constipation, a lot of times is due to insufficient fiber or water intake. Like I said, the more fiber you have, the more water you're going to want to drink, but that will help bulk up your feces and it'll help move things along. Diarrhea is the opposite. It's kind of overactivity of the smooth muscle. Everything's moving too quickly through the digestive system to be absorbed properly. So you got a lot of water left over and all of it kind of comes out at once. So it can be serious if it lasts for an extended period of time because it does lead you to lose both water and electrolytes because it moves too quickly through your large intestine for those things to be absorbed. So something you want to be careful with. And then hemorrhoids, or where the veins in the rectus and the rectum and the anus, excuse me, are inflamed and distended and can like kind of hang out of your bottom a little bit. A lot of times that can be caused by, well, pregnancy for one. Chronic constipation can be a cause of hemorrhoids as well, because you're straining a lot to try to have a bowel movement that can cause the blood to kind of become stuck in those anal and rectal veins and cause them to become swollen or distended. And they can be kind of itchy and sore and stuff. So again, fiber And making sure that you're regular, you're regular with your bowel movements and not straining too hard, helps a lot with preventing hemorrhoids. Once you have them, there is treatment. You can have them kind of surgically removed or repaired or stripped kind of to get rid of them if they're a big problem for you. All right, more serious stuff. IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. It's kind of a functional disorder involving changes in your colon rhythm, your peristaltic activity in the colon. So you can have IBS C, which is IBS with constipation, or IBS D, which is IBS with diarrhea. Yeah, and that's uh, two opposite ends of the spectrum, but both considered kind of an irritable bowel condition. Then we have celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease where the um, uh, consuming gluten causes your immune system to attack the lining of your small intestine, and you're not able to absorb gluten-containing products, and also causes a lot of damage to the lining of your small intestine. That's a real, and it's a serious disease, and that's like people that would need to eat gluten-free for sure have that. Now, some people claim to have a gluten sensitivity. Lots of people claim to have a gluten sensitivity. That is something entirely different. Celiac disease is a real medical autoimmune condition, and it's definitely related to gluten consumption. Um, we have inflammatory bowel disease of several different types. So like Crohn's disease would be an inflammatory bowel disease. Um, yeah, that would be one good example of an inflammatory bowel disease. And then the last one is colon cancer. Um, It is one of the leading forms of cancer, but if you detect it early enough, it's really fairly easily curable. It's by after the age of, I think, 45 now. After the age of 45, they recommend having colonoscopies, and what they do is they look for early signs of cancer, which we call polyps, abnormal tissues in the colon, and they can remove them pretty quickly. What will lower your risk of developing colon cancer is a high fiber, low fat diet. That is the leading thing that helps prevent colon cancer. High fiber, low fat diet. All right, and this goes through kind of some of those things, the symptoms, the causes, and the treatments for each of the things that we've kind of talked about there. And that ends our chapter. Thanks for sticking with me today, and we'll see you again next week.